My name is Nazik Sidiki, and for years I lived as a man consumed by an obsession with success. At 34, I was a billionaire entrepreneur, the owner of a global network of offices that employed hundreds of people. I spent nearly every minute of my day working, often staying up late into the night, strategizing ways to increase my wealth. I grew up in a traditional Muslim family, a direct descendant of Abu Bakr al-Siddiq, the first caliph of Islam. My faith was unshakable, and I had a total disdain for Christianity. It was forbidden in my company to hire Christians, as I didn't want to risk being influenced by their beliefs. The worship of money, power, and recognition redefined my existence, but despite accumulating wealth and prestige, I felt a persistent dissatisfaction inside, a quiet restlessness, an emptiness that I tried to ignore, convinced that success was all that mattered. Everything changed on a night that began like any other, but turned out to be a pivotal moment in my life. I was in Toronto for work when I felt an unusual pain on the right side of my body. Initially, I thought it was just fatigue, the result of relentless long days, but within a few hours the pain became unbearable. My face began to burn as if it were on fire, and large blisters started to emerge on my skin. My eyes burned, and my vision began to blur. I was urgently rushed to the hospital, where the doctors looked at me with alarmed expressions. They ran various tests and informed me that I was facing one of the most severe cases of shingles they had ever seen. My body was literally ravaged by the disease, and my temperature shot up to critical levels, with a fever reaching 40 degrees Celsius. My life was in danger. Already showing signs of neurological damage, that night, one of the doctors locked eyes with me, and with a coldness that chilled my blood stated, "You will not survive until dawn." Fear struck me hard. I, a man who had always maintained control over every aspect of my life, was now faced with something that not even money could buy: my own death. Lying on that hospital bed, I felt my body burning inside and out. My skin seemed to be made of fiery coals, and each heartbeat amplified the excruciating pain that coursed through me like an electric shock. The blisters had disfigured half of my face, and with a heavy heart I could barely see. Every breath was an immense effort, as if my lungs were refusing to cooperate. Time seemed to stretch into infinity. The room, initially just a clinical and lifeless space, had transformed into a prison where I awaited my final sentence. I had never found the time to reflect on death, nor had I ever wanted to, yet now it was there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to take me away. Alone in that bed, staring at the ceiling, I understood the deafening silence surrounding me. My employees, my business, my fortune, none of it mattered anymore. All I had was myself, and an ending that was drawing near. It was in that desperate moment that I did something I had never done before. I begged God. It wasn't an elaborate or formal prayer, but a silent cry from the depths of my soul. "God, help me," I pleaded, not knowing if anyone was listening. My heart was filled with fear, and for a moment I thought the void would respond with the same silence. But in the blink of an eye, the room began to change. A presence made its way in, and an intense light started to fill the space around me. It wasn't an ordinary light. It not only illuminated but seemed to have a life of its own. The air grew heavy, charged with something profound. My body, which until that moment had been crushed by pain, now felt enveloped in a different warmth. Not the warmth of fever, but something mysteriously reassuring. And then I saw him, before me, surrounded by that blinding light. There was someone my mind struggled to recognize. The figure was imposing yet not intimidating. It radiated a peace so deep that for a moment I forgot the pain, the fear, and the illness. My heart began to beat faster, not out of panic, but from an expectation I had never felt before. The light surrounding him was so intense that my eyes, already strained from illness, should have burned. Yet that was not the case. In fact, everything appeared to me with a clarity I had never experienced before. I wanted to speak, to ask who the entity before me was, but before I could utter a word, a voice filled the space. It was a voice that came not only from outside but also from within me. It resonated in my bones, in my blood, in my soul. I am the God of Christians. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My blood ran cold, and my heart almost stopped. It made no sense. Ever since I was a child, I had been taught that Abraham was the father of Muslims through Ishmael, that Christianity was wrong, that Jesus was just a prophet and not God. And yet, there he was, present, speaking to me. My instinct was to reject that vision. It couldn't be real. Every fiber of my being screamed that it went against everything I knew, everything I had been taught. Yet, at the same time, a deeper truth began to emerge within me, like an ember burning deep in my soul. I was staring at that figure, unable to look away. The glow enveloping it pulsed as if it had a life of its own, as if it were conscious. And then something impossible happened. As it approached me, I realized that my pain was fading. The blisters on my skin no longer burned, and for the first time in days, I felt real relief. It wasn't just a psychological reaction, nor a fever-induced hallucination. It was all authentic, my very existence. I wanted to speak, to ask why it was there, but before I could utter a word, I was overwhelmed by a deep sense of peace, a serenity that no amount of money could ever offer me. I didn't know how to behave. Everything within me wanted to resist, to fight against what I was seeing, to deny what was before my eyes. But how could I do that? That presence was more real than anything I had ever known. And so, for the first time, I looked him straight in the eyes. They didn't resemble the images I had seen in Christian paintings or books. There was something much deeper, something that seemed to pierce through my soul and reveal every thought, every mistake, and every ambition that had consumed me for years. His eyes, those eyes were unlike anything I had ever seen before. They were not just human eyes, but resembled living flames, and at the same time they were full of indescribable tenderness. There was no judgment in them. I had expected to be judged, to receive reproaches, to be accused for everything I had done in my life. But what I saw was only love, a love so overwhelming that for the first time it made me feel small and vulnerable. The powerful businessman, the man who led hundreds of employees, the millionaire who always seemed to have all the answers, found himself completely disoriented. My whole body trembled, but not out of fear. It was something different, as if the very structure of my life was being reorganized. I wanted to speak, to ask him who he really was, but before my lips could say a word, he spoke again. "I am Jesus." My heart stopped. It couldn't be true. This went against everything I knew, against every conviction I held, and yet there was no way to deny it. There in front of me was the figure I had always rejected, the one I had excluded from my life and had always judged as an invention of Christians. And yet, there he was, watching me and calling me by name, without me saying a word. My convictions began to crumble. It seemed as though they faded in the light of that presence. I didn't know what to think. My mind screamed that it was impossible, yet my spirit seemed to already recognize the truth even before I could accept it. How could it be Jesus? How could he be standing there in front of me? Since I was a child, I had been taught that God could never have a son and that Jesus was just a prophet like many others. And yet, there he was, and everything inside me said that this was the purest reality I had ever known. I wanted to deny it. I wished to close my eyes and convince myself it was just a fever-induced hallucination. But I knew it wasn't. Never in my life had I felt something so authentic and powerful. My mouth was dry, my breath quickening, and despite trying to formulate a question, no words would come out. The silence lasted what felt like an eternity. He kept looking at me, and I felt as if he was breaking down my arrogance, my presumptions, and all that I had built up as defenses over the years. Then, before me, a scene unfolded, as if I were watching a movie that told the story of my life. I saw my existence flash before my eyes, not as I had perceived it in the past. I revisited the moments when I neglected my family to work a few extra hours, the reflections where I humiliated my employees for trivial mistakes, the times I let my greed take over. I saw countless occasions where I could have helped someone but chose money instead, and worst of all, I saw the emptiness in my own eyes. I had always believed that my success was confirmation that I was on the right path, but there, observing everything with crystal clarity, I realized I was a lost man chasing the wind. My eyes filled with tears, and I could no longer recognize myself. In that moment, I understood that everything I had valued up to that point was meaningless. I could no longer hold back the tears. I, who had always been a man of steel, never showing signs of weakness, had learned to hide every emotion to maintain the facade of success. I found myself there, shattered before that presence. The truth was overwhelming, but in that moment, I didn't feel oppressed. Rather, that weight was setting me free. I was finally discovering who I truly was, and for the first time in my life, that scared me. Not so much for what I could lose, but for what I had already lost without even realizing it. Years spent chasing money, power, vanity, and what had I gained? Lying on a hospital bed close to death with no one beside me. I had enough money to buy anything, but not a single cent could buy me an extra second of life. I looked at Jesus and felt that he already knew all of this. He didn't need me to speak. He knew everything about my soul, every thought, every doubt, every fear. Then he stepped closer to me, extending his hand. I didn't know how to react. That hand shone with an indescribable light, as if it contained all the life of the universe. I hesitated. I could have turned it down, closed my eyes, and pretended nothing was happening, but for the first time, I didn't want to run away. Every fiber of my being was pleading to grasp that hand, to accept what was about to happen, but one last doubt pierced me like a blow, asking, why me? Why have you come to me after I've spent my whole life denying you? It wasn't necessary to voice it out loud. He already knew. And then, with a steady voice, yet filled with a compassion I had never known, he answered me, because I have always been waiting for you. Those words struck me like lightning. I have always been waiting for you. It felt as if my entire existence was concentrated in that single moment, as if every wrong choice, every act of pride, and every wasted day in the pursuit of riches had led me to that impossible meeting. In that moment, I felt vulnerable, completely exposed, yet surrounded by an indescribable peace. There was no judgment in his voice, no resentment or condemnation, only love. A love so pure and absolute that for a moment I thought I might not be able to bear its intensity. Never in my life had I experienced anything like it. I would have never believed I could forge such a deep and genuine connection with someone I had spent my life denying. My throat was dry, while my thoughts raced 1,000 miles an hour. How could I have been so blind? How was it possible that I had spent so many years believing that he didn't exist and that he didn't matter, and yet there he was, telling me that he had always been waiting for me? My whole body trembled. Something inside me was shattering, disintegrating, but it wasn't a bad thing. It was as if the chains I hadn't even been aware of were melting away, one by one. The pain from the illness that had plagued me just hours before now felt like a distant memory. I no longer felt the fever or the burning blisters on my skin. Only that moment remained, that presence. And then, Without knowing exactly why, I did something I would have never thought possible. I knelt, or at least it felt that way, because my physical body was still lying in the hospital bed. Yet inside me, everything was bowing down before him. I wanted to speak, but no words seemed adequate. I wanted to ask for forgiveness, but I didn't know where to begin. The only thing I could do was look at him with tear-filled eyes, revealing all that I carried within. Then something even more extraordinary happened: the light. It intensified around him, and I felt a sweet warmth enveloping me, but it was more than just physical warmth. It was as if my very soul had been touched by that light. Suddenly, a series of memories surfaced in my mind, and they were unlike the moments when I saw my life flash before me. This time, they were instances where I felt an inexplicable emptiness, a silent pain of which I was unaware of its origin. I realized that in each of those moments, in every night of solitude, in every circumstance when success and money had failed to fill the void inside me, he was there, silent, waiting. When I felt lost without knowing why, when a great achievement was followed by a confusing sadness I couldn't explain, it was him I was searching for without realizing it. And now he was right in front of me, clearly showing me that he had never abandoned me, not even when I spent my whole life rejecting him. Tears streamed down my face uncontrollably. I had never cried so much in my life and had never allowed anyone to see me vulnerable. Yet now, I didn't care anymore. For the first time, I understood what years of study, business, power, and wealth had failed to teach me. Everything I had sought had been right in front of me all along. But the question that tormented me remained: why me? What could I possibly do now, knowing that my whole life had been built on a falsehood? How could I simply abandon everything I had believed in? I looked at Jesus, waiting for an answer, and he, with a gaze of infinite patience, simply said, "You have a choice." Those words echoed within me like an endless reverberation: a choice. All my life I had believed I already had all the answers. I had never been a man who left anything to chance. I planned every step, every investment, and every decision with meticulous precision. But now, standing before him, I realized that for the first time, I was faced with a genuine choice that wasn't tied to money, career, or power. It was something far more significant. Deep inside, I sensed that this moment was crucial, that there would be no turning back. If I turned my back, if I ignored something I had always sought, even without being aware of it, what would it mean to accept and believe in him? What would it mean for my life, for everything I had built, for my family, who had always raised me to view Christianity as a lie? The weight of that choice was crushing. I was in a state of uncertainty, eager to believe and surrender completely to that presence, but fear overwhelmed me. What would happen to me? What would become of my identity, my reputation, everything I had achieved? Then, Jesus took a further step and spoke words that broke down all my defenses. "What you have acquired so far has not saved you." Those words hit me like a blade, forcing me to reflect on how my money had not prevented my illness, my power had not saved me from that hospital bed, and my wealth had not given me the peace I was so desperately seeking. No, the answer was a resounding no. In that moment, for the first time, I understood that everything I had built was like quicksand, and the only stable thing I had left was him. My breath became shallow, and I felt something unknown in my chest. A weight, an invisible chain that had imprisoned me for years without my realization. Every commitment, every signed contract, every dollar earned now seemed insignificant. I looked at Jesus and realized he was waiting for me. He wasn't forcing me into anything, wasn't demanding any tribute, but was simply offering me a choice. It was in that precise moment that I grasped the simplest yet most devastating truth of my life. I had never been in control. I had spent my life believing I was the architect of my own destiny, that I had achieved success through my intelligence and hard work. But standing there in front of him, I realized I was just a lost man trying to build a fortress on foundations of sand. The illness that afflicted me was merely a physical reflection of the inner turmoil I carried within. So, without further hesitation, I did the only thing left to do, with unstoppable tears streaming down my face, caring for nothing but that moment. I whispered, "I choose you." As those words left my lips, something inexplicable happened. It was as if a wave of energy surged through my body, dissolving all fear, all resistance, all doubt. A light even more intense enveloped me, and for a moment I felt as if my body was no longer there. My soul seemed to be transported to a place beyond human understanding, a space where only total peace existed. There was no more pain, no more doubt. I felt fulfilled, as if I had spent my entire life searching for something without knowing what it was, and I had finally found it. Suddenly, everything around me began to change. The light surrounding me slowly started to fade, as if it were retreating to a place beyond my comprehension. The face of Jesus was still right in front of me, but his expression now conveyed something deeper, a profound understanding, as if he knew exactly what I was experiencing. I wanted to stay there forever. For the first time, I felt I had found what I had always been searching for, and the thought of returning to the world as I knew it terrified me. But then, before I could say anything, he spoke again. "Now you must go back." My heart tightened. Go back? Back to where? How could I return to the life I had before, knowing what I now knew? How could I continue to live as I had before, after being in his presence? Before I could protest, I felt something different. It was as if my body was being pulled back, as if something was bringing me back to the place I had come from. Everything began to fade into a deep darkness. Absolute silence surrounded me, and for a moment I feared I had lost everything. But then I began to feel that weight. My body was once again in the hospital bed, my vision was blurred, and my breath returned. Suddenly, I sensed the sounds around me, the beeping of machines, the whispered voices in the corridors, the hurried footsteps of doctors. I was back. I slowly opened my eyes, squinting against the blinding light of the room. The first thing I noticed was the absence of pain, the fire that had burned my body, the tormenting fever, the physical suffering that had held me captive for the past few days. All of it had vanished. I ran my fingers over my face, expecting to feel the skin scarred by blisters, but something was different. I knew that something extraordinary had happened, and at that moment, I realized that my life would never be the same again. The news of my recovery spread quickly through the hospital. Nurses entered my room as if I were an unexplainable mystery. The doctors requested further tests, searching for a scientific explanation for that miraculous healing, but I didn't need reports or diagnoses. I knew that the fever which had kept me on the brink of death had disappeared, and my body, once considered lost, was regenerating before everyone's eyes. But more importantly, I was aware that something much deeper had changed. I was no longer the man who had entered that hospital bed. Something inside me had been restored, a need I had never known existed. Sitting on that bed, surrounded by people trying to understand the impossible, I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered, "Thank you, Jesus." My discharge from the hospital was as quick and unexpected as my healing. The doctors were still incredulous, searching for a scientific explanation for what had occurred, but I knew. Forming an unshakable belief, the man who had entered expecting death was no longer the same one who walked out 2 days later. Everything looked different. The air, the sunlight, the voices around me. It was as if I was seeing the world for the first time, as if every tiny detail held new meaning. Yet there was still something that troubled me, the scars. Despite the miraculous healing, marks of the illness remained on my face. It wasn't a matter of vanity, but a reminder. Even though I knew that Jesus had saved me, I still wondered if those scars would remain as a testament to what I had been through. So, on my way home, I knelt down again and said, "Lord, if it is your will, I accept it. But if there is still something for me, if this story isn't complete, please complete the work." The days that followed were even more astonishing than my initial healing. In just a few days, the scars began to fade, not slowly or gradually, but supernaturally. It was as if my skin was regenerating right before my eyes. Within a week, there wasn't even a trace of the illness left. Every doctor who had treated me was stunned. One of them even asked me directly, "What did you do?" I simply smiled and replied, "I prayed." But deep down I knew it wasn't just any prayer. It was proof that the very Jesus who had appeared to me that night was still with me, not only to save me, but also to give me a new beginning. What I gained in return was far greater than anything I had ever lost. I began to travel and share my testimony, at first speaking to small groups, then at conferences in churches, and before I knew it, crowds were coming to listen to me. I saw Muslims, just like I had been, breaking down their barriers, questioning what they had always accepted as absolute truth. I witnessed people healed right before my eyes, simply through the power of the name of Jesus. What had started as an encounter in a hospital, supernatural in a hospital room, had transformed into a mission I could never have predicted for myself. Yet despite the miracles and transformations I was witnessing, what struck me most were the simple words that Jesus had communicated to me that night. "I have always waited for you." Those phrases were not just for me, but for everyone. Over time, I realized that my life would never be the same. I no longer owned my business or held the prestige I once had among the industry's elite, but ironically, I had never felt so abundant. The emptiness that had plagued me in the past, the invisible hole that no achievement could fill, had completely vanished. In its place, a deep peace had taken over, a serenity that didn't waver with circumstances, one that couldn't be bought or lost. I now understood that my true wealth was not in the material possessions I had accumulated, but in the truth I had discovered that night, and most importantly, in the relationship I now had with the one who had saved me. However, this did not mean the path would be simple. On the contrary, persecutions increased. I received threats, was publicly attacked, and on several occasions my life was put in danger. Yet every time I was asked why I continued, the answer was clear: because I had seen, and once one knows the truth, there is no turning back. I recall a particular event, a conference in the United States, where many Muslim individuals confronted me. I felt no resentment, as I knew exactly what they were feeling. I had been in their position. I understood the fear that gripped them, the weight of tradition, the terror of rejection. However, standing before them, I posed a simple challenge: pray and ask Allah to heal the sick present here. The silence that followed was total. No one moved. Then I looked at the audience and announced, "Now I will pray in the name of Jesus," and in that moment, it happened. I had learned to do this. I called on the name of Jesus. For 5 days, I laid my hands on my body and prayed, not out of desperation, but with absolute confidence that the one who had healed me before could do it again. And what I hoped for came to pass. On the 5th day, I began to move my fingers. By the 6th, I was already standing, and after a few weeks, I was walking normally. While the doctors were still trying to figure out how this was possible, I was already on my way to Israel, continuing the mission that God had entrusted to me. After that episode, I understood that my life no longer belonged to me. There were no more doubts, hesitations, or questions. Jesus had saved me not only from hell, but also from myself, giving me a new identity, a new purpose, a new life. The physical scars I bore vanished, but the marks of his intervention in my soul remained forever. Even today, when I reflect on who I was before that night in the hospital, I feel an indescribable gratitude. How could I have anticipated that my greatest tragedy would become my greatest blessing? How could I have known that the moment I was losing everything coincided exactly with the moment I was gaining everything? Now my mission is clear: to share this truth with as many people as possible, regardless of the cost, persecution, or risk. I know what I believe in, I know who I trust, and I am certain he is waiting for many others, just as he waited for me. And if you, reading this now, feel a void in your life, a gap that nothing seems to fill, I want to tell you what Jesus told me that night. I have always been waiting for you. He is not far away. He is not merely a concept, a religion, or an idea. He is real. I know this because I have experienced it, because I have touched it, because I have been transformed. You can ignore it, you can resist it, you can try to escape it, but in the end, he will always be there waiting for you. And the day you decide to seek him, the day you decide to call out to him, he will come just as he came to me. I had learned to invoke the name of Jesus, and for 5 days I laid my hands on my body, praying not with desperation, but with unshakable confidence that the one who had already healed me in the past could do it again. And that's exactly what happened. On the 5th day, I started moving my fingers. By the 6th, I was already standing, and after a few weeks I was walking normally. While doctors were still trying to understand how this was possible, I was already preparing to leave for Israel, carrying out the mission that God had assigned to me. After that event, I realized that my life was no longer just mine. There were no more uncertainties, doubts, or questions. Jesus had saved me, not only from hell, but also from myself. He had given me a new identity, a new purpose, a new life. The scars I once had on my body faded, but the marks he left on my soul remained forever. Even today, when I think of who I was before that night in the hospital, I feel an indescribable gratitude. How could I have imagined that my greatest tragedy would become my greatest blessing? How could I have known that the moment I was losing everything was exactly the moment I would gain everything? Now my mission is simple: to bring this truth to as many people as possible, no matter the cost, the persecution, or the risk. I know what I believe in, I know whom I trust, and I am certain he is waiting for many others, just as he waited for me. And if you, reading this, feel that something is missing from your life, that there's an emptiness that nothing can fill, I tell you what Jesus told me that night: I have always been waiting for you. He's not far away. He's not a concept, a religion, or an idea. He is real. I know because I have seen him, because I have touched him, and because I have been transformed. You can ignore him, you can resist him, you can try to run away, but in the end, he will always be there waiting for you. And the day you decide to look for him, the day you decide to call on him, he will come to you, just as he did back then. If there's one thing I want to convey to you from this narration, it's this: don't wait until you hit rock bottom to understand that there is something greater. Don't wait until you lose everything to realize that you have never been alone. You don't need to experience a near-death experience to discover that he is there, waiting. All you have to do is call on him. Just say, "Jesus, reveal yourself to me," and I assure you that if you do this with a sincere heart, he will answer you. Maybe not in the way you imagine, nor with a blinding light in a hospital room, but in such a tangible way that you won't be able to deny it. Because at the end of the day, the truth is simple. He waits. He has always waited. and he will continue to wait. If this story has touched you, I ask you, have you ever experienced moments that challenged your beliefs? Have you ever had an encounter that revolutionized your life? I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and share your experience. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss more transformative stories like this. This helps us continue to provide meaningful content. Now, if you want to dive deeper into supernatural experiences and divine revelations, click on the next video already visible on the screen. You won't want to miss it. See you soon.